again, so you get it.
Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. Yep. For those of you who don't know, my name's John, and I'm here to chat to you about this novel, Panthera. Okay, the talk I'm giving is entitled Panthera, Empathy, the Environment, Animals, and Mankind. Sorry, I'm going to be reading mostly because I spent a lot of time writing this trying to get it right. Okay, a bit of background information about the novel. It's very loosely, I say, urban fantasy, but it's not like underworld vampires versus werewolves kind of stuff at all. It's more like sort of a bit of Victorian kind of literature mixed with a Zulu folktale mixed with the modern. So it's a mix of a bunch of things. The hero, the other characters, well, some other characters in the novel are werewolves, as you might understand them to be, except they're not wolves. They're were-animals. Okay, there's a were-leopard, a were-hippopotamus, and a were-tiger in this one. I'm working on a bunch of other characters in the new one, but don't worry about that yet. Okay, it's not a horror story. It might look like one from the cover, but it's definitely not horror. There's maybe elements of it, but no. It's basically a love story and a bit of contemporary fiction as well, mixed in. It's urban in that the setting is the present day. It's not in Victorian times or the medieval era. But mostly the story is set in rural KwaZulu-Natal. This is my home province in South Africa. And it's a place that I have much love for. It's where I grew up. It is the cradle of humankind. It is beautiful. It's also tragic. And it's one of the last great wild places in the world. A bit of context regarding why I set the novel there and why I used the were-animal theme. I'm going to go back to the source of things for me. A writer's adage is, write what you know. From an early age, I've had an immense love for and an inexhaustible fascination with animals and the African bush. For the longest time, it was actually my childhood dream to be a game ranger and to live out in the wilds and protect the wild animals from poachers and hunters and things like that. The best family trip memories I have from when I was a little kid was when my dad took me out to the game reserves for just because he's a wildlife photographer in his spare time, and we'd watch the animals and take photos and just enjoy being out there. I loved it. When I was a kid in the 80s, there was no internet, there was no Discovery Channel, so because I was so interested in all these things, I just went to the good old books. That's where I got my information. So from the time even before I learned how to read, and when I learned how to read, I just sat and read books and books about animals. And I love drawing as well, so I would read a book about animals, then I would draw. This is what I would do when I was a kid. So crayons and books, these were like two of my favorite things when I was a little kid. I did also enjoy being outdoors. Thankfully, it was the age before the internet and computer games and all the things that keep kids indoors these days. So I'm definitely, in this talk, I'm talking about getting away from this hyper-modernized, ultra-technological world with all its addictions that many people fall into, like kids and adults alike. It's all part of what I want to talk about in this. Okay, so that was my early childhood. Let's fast forward to my 20s. I studied literature at university, and in my courses, because I studied in South Africa, obviously, many of the courses, the arts courses, the literature courses, the history courses were about Africa and African cultures, African arts, African literature. So I've already been interested in Zulu culture specifically from an early age. My mother used to lecture Zulu at university, and the Zulus are the tribal group in my province at home. It's a fascinating language, and they have an amazing history, which intersects with my own history, the sort of British settler history. But I'm not going to talk too much about that now. Also in my 20s, my late teens, I developed a love for horror movies, and the 80s and the 90s were great times for some really interesting horror movies. So you can see where this Panthera cocktail is starting to brew, like my interest from animals, a little bit of horror here and there, the werewolf thing, which I was fascinated with. Okay, but the idea hadn't formed just yet. Now what I'd started to realize by the time I was in my 20s was that most things I'd been interested in all sorts of fields, had been ways in which I could make sense of the world. I'd found meaning and an outlet for intensity and discontent, which boiled inside me in politically charged punk music, the its criticisms of dominant cultural norms, corporatism, and the servile obedience of the masses to a system that exploited them and sucked them dry of life. I'd also found a strange beauty in the hopelessness, angst, and bleak outlook on life that characterized the grunge and alternative rock movements of the 90s. So I started playing drums when I was a teenager, and it gave me a physical outlet for like these feelings that I had inside. But I also needed a mental one, and writing provided that for me. I met a man in university who kind of inspired the main character in Panthera, partly. He was my age, at that time, sort of early 20s. He was just a janitor at the university. He was a well-spoken, intelligent, and very gentle and kind man. But because of his lot in life, he was resigned to working these menial jobs for minimum wage. He didn't really have any way to get ahead in life. We never really struck up a formal friendship, but we had some very good conversations together. I mean, he had simple dreams. He just wanted to get a university degree. He really dreamed of like traveling to another country, but for someone like him, that would be absolutely impossible, because when you're on minimum wage in South Africa, it's the equivalent of like 30, 40 NT an hour. So you're really stuck just scraping by for the bare essentials. Now I couldn't help but empathize with this guy. I mean, he was my age, same as me. We seemed to have similar personalities, but his dreams just seemed completely unobtainable to him because of his lot in life. Now this is what I want to talk about in my talk, is empathy. It's a very important idea. Also, what I've come across in my research about empathy is a link between empathy and fiction, specifically. Now I've got a number of friends who are in like the hard science fields and economics and things like that, who think that literature is a very frivolous, sort of throwaway concern. It's worthless, it doesn't have anything to do with numbers and making money and all the things that we think are important. Yet, I would disagree. I would completely disagree. I think that literature and arts are things that make us human, and they're an essential part of the human experience. Empathy is linked to reading fiction. I read a study about this. Now, that might sound strange initially, but if you think about it, it's not really. Because what is reading fiction? Well, it's about getting into someone else's head. Okay. Fiction itself is a very bland medium, if you just look at this. Okay. When I open this up, it's pages full of ink. That's it. It's a white page with black ink on it. There's nothing visually interesting about it. There is no emotional soundtrack to stir your mind or your emotions. There's no one spoon-feeding you anything. There are no images to look at. There's no taste. There's no smell. There are just these ink words on a page. So you have to take those words into your head, and you have to construct a living, breathing human being inside your own head, in the space that nobody else can get to but you. It's your very personal space, and you're constructing people, a world inside of this. Okay, so to do that, you need to understand what it is to be human. To make a human being inside your head, you have to understand that yourself. You need to use the power of your mind, the vastness of your imagination, to make this person who has dreams, hopes, loves, hates, desires, right? Whether they're a villain, whether they're a hero, whether they're just a side character. You need to make them inside your head. Okay, and that's something that you can only do when you read fiction. That's the only sort of medium you do when you're reading fiction. So you are experiencing the world through someone else whenever you read a story, when you read a novel. You're making a world, you're experiencing this world through your own mind, through another character. And this feeling through someone else, this is the definition of empathy. All right? To be able to understand what someone or something else is feeling without being that person. And the world, I think, right now is suffering from a crisis of empathy. I'm sure we all know people who are apathetic about everything but their own self-interests. And strangely enough, there are many people who seem to be proud to be apathetic about things and not care about anything whatsoever. Like, to me, this is very tragic and very sad. I've also read, as I mentioned, I've been doing research on this in recent times. According to a very long-term university survey, I can't remember which one it was, but empathy among young adults, university-age adults, has dropped very steeply in the last few years compared to the youth of the 80s and 90s. And also, this has coincided with a very steep drop in levels of recreational reading of fiction. Like, many people just don't read anymore. And as I said, I read other studies that have linked this reading of fiction to empathy. So there's the link. Now, why is empathy so important? Why? Why am I insisting on this? Well, in my novel, in Panthera, the major themes, first of all, the overriding theme between the main characters, Babam Keys and his soulmate Nandi, is love, romantic love. Essentially, though, because of a lack of empathy and some other cultural factors on both of their parts, they have a fight, they squabble, and because of pride as well. I mean, we're all guilty of the sin of pride, surely. And because of that, they throw away what was a beautiful relationship, and all too quickly, just because of an argument. And it has dire consequences further down the line for them. Okay, I'm not going to talk too much about that one though, because other themes which are of great importance to me personally in this novel are animals and the natural environment. For me personally, the wonders of the natural world, in awe-inspiring landscapes, and the perfection of these wild creatures who've evolved far longer than we have to be perfectly in harmony with their environments. These things surpass any beauty of anything that man has created. Like, there is such perfection, such beauty in the natural world, which we tend to forget about a lot. And the relationship between Baba and Nandi, the main characters, it's at its best when they're frolicking in their waterfall pool, when they're ruling over their forest, when they're owning nothing material, they're using no currency, producing no goods, they're simply existing in a state of love and bliss in this ancient, eternally sustainable and renewable paradise. In the forest, the threat comes from outsiders who come in with guns to plunder this landscape that has existed. Outside of the forest, because part of it is set in the city, the corruption of the human heart and dark desires is mirrored in the squalid, rundown city that I describe in there. I'm very concerned with the plight of the natural world. I also believe passionately in causes of justice and fairness, and the idea that if we will it, good can triumph over evil. Yet many good people who share similar views, like, they seem to act in a completely different manner. It's a matter of realizing and getting in touch with your empathy that we need to start acting in different manners, rather than being simply these consumers who fuel a machine that is sort of slowly but surely devouring the entire natural world to make products for us that are essentially disposable and unessential. This is a great concern of mine. I mean, we've got, cattle ranching eating up the Brazilian rainforest. We've got palm oil tearing up the Malaysian rainforest. We've got plastic just filling up the oceans. We're overfishing the oceans to the point where they're going to be dead in 30 years, according to many predictions. Now, empathy, again. Buddha said, see yourself in others. Then whom can you hurt? What harm can you do? And this is the essence of empathy. Like, we need to be able to see ourselves in empathy, in other beings. If we were truly empathetic beings, we could not allow these things to happen. We would look at our own behavior was contributing to everything we see around us, all this destructiveness, and make personal sacrifices accordingly to stop it. Instead of blaming politicians, instead of blaming corporations, instead of blaming everyone but ourselves. Okay, I'm going to just say a quick thing about Panthera, which is a big spoiler, so forgive me. I killed one of the main characters in the novel. And I did this because I wanted to create a lasting impact, something that would really sit tight with the reader and like force them into this place where they'd grown to love this character, and suddenly your heart's ripped out. Okay. I didn't just do it because I'm cruel. I did it because I wanted empathy to really sink in and to understand how these things have contributed to the problems that we see. Now, okay, I'm going to skip to the end here because I've only got like a minute left. But basically, just me talking about this is not going to really solve anything, is it? Like, you can throw facts figures at people and do all of this, but it's not really going to change it. As I said, going back to fiction, this is why I set my things to a story. Alright, I've got my concerns, I've got my beliefs, I've got everything I view about the world. But if I just sit and talk about it with people, or I write articles or put up numbers and things like that, it's not really going to make a difference. But if I put it in a story that's easy to read, that's got characters that you will love or hate or sympathize with or want to kill, whatever, like characters are what drives a story, right? That's what Game of Thrones is like, that everyone loves the characters in Game of Thrones. That's what drives it forward. And that's what I've tried to do in my book. I've tried to have a driving narrative, fast-paced, interesting characters, while carrying these themes that I think are very important to life and to having the human experience. I was going to use a quote from one of my favorite writers. I can't seem to find it right now. Here it is. Okay. Yeah, John Steinbeck, one of my favorite writers, absolutely. He says, "It has always seemed strange to me, the things we admire in men, kindness, generosity, openness, honesty, understanding and feeling, are the concomitants of failure in our system. The traits we detest, like sharpness, greed, acquisitiveness, meanness, egotism, and self-interest, these are the traits of success. While men admire the quality of the first set of qualities, they love the produce of the second. This is the tragedy of our times, but we need to fix this. So my friends, let us read fiction, let us learn to empathize again, let us use that empathy to start spreading good in the world, and recognize what's in ourselves and what's in others. Let's read fiction."
Yeah.